Thank you all for coming. I'm Terry Tamminen, the president and CEO of AltaSea at the Port of Los Angeles, a nonprofit dedicated to building the blue economy, which is going to be very much a part of the hydrogen economy, the low carbon economy, things that we're going to talk about today. And some of you I've worked with for many years, formerly the secretary of the California EPA. So part of what we'll talk about today are regulations, things that are going to improve our air quality and our health, as well as our lower carbon future. We'll just give some folks at the back there time. Maybe somebody in the back there could close the door so we don't have the noise from outside. Thank you, Lex. Fantastic. Grab your seat. I think I vamped long enough. So we're going to give each of our panelists a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. Rather than me reading their bios, they'll tell you what they think is most relevant to this, and to give a little overview of their perspective on our topic today, talking about the 710 corridor, but as it pertains to hydrogen and the low carbon economy. And I think the 710 corridor is a little bit too narrow in terms of framing, especially given the distinguished panelists that we have here today, because obviously it's really more about goods movement. It's really more about decarbonizing all of goods movement. And so when you have someone here like Mike Galvin from the port, you're talking about all of the things that come into that port and then how it's handled before it ever gets on the 710 corridor. So in any event, it's a good organizing principle, some way to kind of think about this, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists in their comments to speak more broadly about the overall decarbonization of goods movement, and particularly what you think is the timeline. We've heard deadlines, certainly from the port, of some equipment being converted to zero emission by 2030, some 2035. We have state goals for some of these things. Companies all have goals. LA Metro is here today. They have goals. So as you give your opening remarks, and we can always come back to this in questions, but please also address that timeline of the future, because we keep hearing all these brilliant things about the future. All the tables that are out here and exhibits are all about the future. When will the future be here is a fair question. So let me start with Justin Ward, General Manager of Fuel Cell Development at Toyota, and take it away.
Great, thanks, Terry. So my name is Justin Ward. So I've been with Toyota as part of our fuel cell program since 2001. So at Toyota, we've been developing fuel cell technology since the early 90s, and it's just been an exciting adventure to see how the technology has progressed over the years. Of course, we launched our first generation product, the Toyota Mirai, in 2015, and our second generation product in 2021. So why am I talking about light-duty products and we're talking about the 710 corridor? I'm talking about that because fuel cells are an amazing technology. They can be scaled from small size to light-duty vehicles, to medium-duty vehicles, to heavy-duty and beyond. And so at Toyota, we've been able to demonstrate fuel cells in applications of Class 8 trucks. So we have developed our first ZEP-certified fuel cell powertrain that we now are offering to the marketplace. And so as truck OEMs that would like to have a fuel cell solution, they can come to us and we can provide that solution for them. But it's not just about the logistics transportation, but it's also about energy in general. And an example of that is the 1 megawatt fuel cell system that we developed and is now in operation at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So when we think about our fuel cells and we think about the future and timing, the future is now, the timing is now. And at Toyota, we're ready to really advance and further the growth of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies.
Great, thank you, Justin. Let's move to Mike Galvin, who is our Director of Waterfront and Commercial Real Estate in the Port of Los Angeles and my landlord.
Thanks, Terry. Yes, I have the privilege of being Terry's landlord in this case, the privilege of being Terry's employee, because he is really the one that brought me into the space in hydrogen and really pushing the port to take a really forward-thinking role in the hydrogen economy and pushing it forward. The port has significant Cleaner Action Plan goals in our work with our partner at the Port of Long Beach to get to zero emissions by 2030 on all of our cargo handling equipment, which is almost 4,000 pieces of equipment between the two ports, and in the entire truck fleet, which is 20,000 plus trucks between the two ports by 2035. And we're looking at all technologies that are available out there, but we understand that certain technologies will only work for our heaviest duty pieces of equipment, and those are the highest emissions emitters as well. So it's really critical that we have hydrogen available to us as a technology to be able to advance our Clean Air Action Plan goals and really stop putting emissions into our communities adjacent to the port and up and down the 710 corridor. But to get there, we need help from everybody in this room and beyond. We're at a really critical point. Terry mentioned, when is the future coming? Well, the future's here now. We have equipment that works now, both on the heavy-duty truck side and on the cargo handling equipment side, equipment that's been tested in the port for more than 5 years on the cargo handling equipment side that works really, really well, that works equivalent to diesel types of equipment and can fuel as quickly or close to as quickly as diesel and give us all those attributes that diesel equipment does. And that's really, really important for the port. It's an extremely busy environment that needs a lot of redundancy and resiliency built into it. And if you change the entire dynamic by moving to a technology that is totally different from how we're operating today, you can really upset the apple cart. So in those key areas where we need equipment to run for 20 hours and to refuel large herds of equipment in less than 4 hours in the middle of the night, that's where hydrogen comes in. But we need help to get the price of hydrogen down. Quite honestly, we could give away equipment today and people probably would not take it. And that is the struggle that we're in right now. We need to push that price down. We're hoping that with some refineries going out of business, that there'll be more hydrogen on the marketplace, and that will help us get the price down. But we're also relying on partners like Jason up in the city of Lancaster in filling in that middle market position to start to aggregate demand that can be financeable, that we can use to create more supply and then continue to bring the market down. We think that if we can get it down to a reasonable rate, which is below $10, not an artificially unreasonable $1 a kilogram, but something that really the market can achieve, then we can get within stabbing distance of diesel and be able to let the economics and the quality of the equipment push forward for us. So that's really what our focus is to continue these discussions and making sure everybody's aware that the ports of LA and Long Beach are open and focused on proactively pushing forward the hydrogen economy, because we think it's a big part of the solution to us getting to zero emissions.
Great, thanks, Mike. And as you mentioned, a lot of this has to do with the communities along the 710, around the ports. I wrote a book some years ago called Lives Per Gallon, The True Cost of Our Oil Addiction, where I cited studies from the University of Southern California that a child who lives within a mile of a busy Los Angeles freeway loses as much as 1% of their lung function a year. That's not acceptable to any of us, but of course it's one of those hidden costs that the diesel industry and the fossil fuel industry externalizes to the rest of us. So it's very important that the community gets a chance to speak for itself and to be recognized that this is not just an infrastructure play. It's not just the physical port or the physical freeway. It's the people who live around it and who work along it. So Danny Gamboa has for a long time been a community activist in terms of the environmental justice movement and community. I want to let him have a few words.
Thank you so much. My name is Danny Gamboa, and I am from Long Beach. I am the executive director of Healthy Active Streets. And how many of us were on the 710 this morning? I was. That's how I got here. Really quickly, you just hit upon something that's so important to me, because I have been personally affected by the port pollution, by the goods movement. And as we all know, the goods movement is basically on our economy on wheels. So, Jack, Michael, can you grab a straw real quick? And then Michael and Justin, would you like to get a straw too? Can you have one too? So put that straw in your mouth and breathe through it. If you have asthma, please don't do this. What I'm trying to demonstrate is this is what it feels like to have asthma. it's a restriction. It's a heavy restriction on your breathing, and it sucks. It creates so many disparities in our communities, and the biggest cause of, we know that the mobile sources is the biggest. It's not healthy, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it is pretty difficult to breathe our air, and all we want is clean air, clean water, with our personal rights. So thanks, and thanks for having me.
Before I go to Jack, because Jack, I think you've got a presentation.
Yeah.
So I think you're the only one with a presentation. So let's skip over to Michael Cano from LA Metro.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here and appreciate the chance to present and have a conversation with the colleagues here. I'm an executive officer at LA Metro overseeing multiple teams. Germane to this conversation is the goods movement team and multimodal corridor planning team. We had the privilege over the last several years to redefine how we're investing in the 710 corridor using funds that were initially earmarked for a freeway expansion project, which brings with it additional air quality challenges, displacement challenges, other issues that the community did not want to see. And there's been a sea change, of course, at the policy level from local to regional to federal, even in terms of how to invest in corridors like the 710. But Metro is responsible for the transportation system for the entire county. We don't operate the goods movement vehicles. We don't operate the trains. We don't unload the ships at the port. We don't operate the trucks. But we handle the landside infrastructure, and we need to make sure that we have a shared use system that works. And part of that is how do we accommodate car traffic, mobility options, multimodal options, and then truck traffic, heavy truck traffic on the 710 freeway and within the corridor itself. And the air quality piece becomes absolutely connected to that. As you may know, we have requirements to meet air quality standards as part of our SCAG's mandate to deliver an RTP, a regional transportation plan, that has conformity. So, and our projects need to meet levels of conformity as well. So in taking a look at this, our process really is connecting the local needs within the communities with the regional needs to move goods, not just underpinning the economy, but also making a safe transportation system and allowing our growing population in the LA County and Southern California region to have a prosperous future. But the key issue that we're dealing with is how do you have this regional benefit without creating the localized impacts? And the technology piece, for example, we're very agnostic to zero emission, but we recognize that there are challenges, and our process has led us to invest $50 million as a catalyst to try to attract funding for projects and programs that will advance that goal, but also include the community perspective so that we're not creating new problems locally by having the larger solution impact the local community. So there's a lot of threads here. I'll kind of leave it at that, but just to let you know that that's kind of globally. Our board is made up of the City of LA and the 5 supervisors and representatives from all 88 cities. So, we have a lot of local representation, and so on one hand, we represent the communities that are impacted, but we also have the ability to partner with funding and political support to drive solutions to get to our goals that include a zero-emission heavy-duty truck future.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, Jack, if you want to come up here and manipulate your slides, we'll let you give your talk.
I might be able to do it from there. Yeah, so you can stay here, Terry, please. Come on up. So thank you very much. My name is Jack Brouwer. I'm a professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering at the University of California, Irvine. I've been doing research on hydrogen-related, electrochemical-related technologies for the last 28 years at UC Irvine. 28, oh, can't believe it. But time flies when you're having fun and when you're doing things that you know are going to have an impact. And today, I won't talk about the electrochemical energy conversion technologies themselves, but rather the air quality impacts associated with implementing them in society. So you know that we have the twin challenges that are different that we must overcome if we want energy sustainability. And those include the impacts of our energy conversion on climate and the impacts of our energy conversion on air quality. Now, many people get these confused, so I just want to be clear. We're talking about 2 separate things. One of them is impacting climate and temperatures on Earth. Okay, that's associated with radiative forcing of compounds that get in the atmosphere. The other is the one associated with the health impacts and causing asthma and heart attacks and premature deaths. That's air quality. A complicated set of physics governs that air quality. The emissions that come out of the tailpipe aren't the only thing that matters. Other things matter, like the atmospheric chemistry and the transport and the secondary particles that are made and things like this. Okay? That's what I'm going to talk about today. The good news is that the same technologies that allow us to eliminate fossil, that allow us to actually move goods and services, okay, for affecting the climate positively, also have a positive impact on air quality. Now, not all of them are equal, but let me just say for sure, hydrogen will have a very significant impact on air quality. So what happens when we have pollutant emissions is they come out of our tailpipes, and then they also affect atmospheric chemistry and the transport, dilution, and mixing of all of these compounds, and that's what leads to the mix of air pollutants that affect our health. We have simulated all of these things, and we know that they have severe health impacts. We know that this is the case from epidemiological studies, but also studies of mice and all sorts of things that show the direct link between particles and heart attacks and things like this. And we're still learning how incredibly awful this is. So, we also know that it impacts people differently. I'm one of those fortunate people that lives in Irvine, close to the coast, not close to a freeway, not close to the ports. And people who are exposed to more of these pollutants have greater impacts. And it's usually those that are socially and economically disadvantaged. You can see those communities here. These are those that are in the 25% worst air quality, and they are those who are disadvantaged by air quality inequalities. So, how can we achieve clean air? Today, almost all of the air quality impacts are caused by combustion of fossil fuels. So let's think about what's leading to the emissions impacts that are most severe. People usually like to think of cars, but we've done a really fantastic job. Even though we have tremendous vehicle miles traveled increase, we have lower emissions from the cars than we've ever had, even with combustion of fossil. Look at this. When we're talking about trucks, off-road equipment, aircraft, ships, trains, industry, it's like above 70% of the NOx, SOx. It's above 30% of the ammonia, almost 30% more of the particulate matter. These sorts of things are those that are impacting people most severely. So what can we do? If we use hydrogen in these things alone, not even talking about light duty, which would have another positive impact, we could, in the scoping plan of the California Air Resources Board, use about 2,000 million kilograms every year by 2045. If we did that and we put the emissions from the hydrogen equipment instead of current equipment, and then we simulate the atmospheric chemistry and transport, what happens? We see reductions in ground level ozone, reductions in particulate matter, and they happen in the places where we need it, where people are exposed to these emissions. And the largest reductions you can see here are in Southern California. We simulated the emissions reductions throughout the state, but Southern California and right along these transportation corridors, these freight corridors. The results are pretty tremendous, a 42%, 76% reduction in these exceedances. Tremendous. By 2045, you can see that we have like a third of the total impact of particulate matter, which is mostly coming not directly out of the tailpipe, but from the atmospheric chemistry and transport thereafter. This is tremendous, and it leads to incredible health benefits. When you put those health benefits in just the disadvantaged communities, in 2045, you're looking at greater than $60 billion in savings every year. Savings due to decreased impact of lung function, cancer risk, cardiovascular risk, and premature death. $60 billion each year just by implementing hydrogen in disadvantaged communities. I can't believe we don't value this appropriately. We must invest in hydrogen and these other alternatives. This is what we do if we don't. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think that summarized it. We can adjourn for lunch. Fantastic. Well, you know, you mentioned we have to do this. We've heard about cost as one of the barriers. I want to ask each of you what you think are the barriers to this kind of future. Because is it that fuel cost? Is it equipment? Is it just lethargy, business as usual, where industries are reluctant to take on anything new, even if it seems economically the same or a little bit more expensive? But I want to just first address myself the cost issue. Mike, you raised the point that hydrogen fuel is very expensive, even if you could give away the equipment. But this morning, before coming here, I fueled up my hydrogen car, and it would cost $25 a kilogram. Now, a kilogram, and Jack will correct me if I get the science wrong here, but a kilogram of hydrogen has about the same energy as a gallon of gasoline. So if you think that $25 is compared to, say, $5 a gallon for gasoline, well, no one would pay that. But because a hydrogen fuel cell car is an electric car, it's 2.5 times more efficient than an internal combustion vehicle. So that $25 is actually more equivalent to a $10 a gallon gasoline. Am I close?
Right on.
Very good. So raise your hand if you've recently paid $10 or more for a gallon of gasoline. You're all wrong, because if any one of you has bought a gallon of gasoline, you paid more than $10. Again, I'll refer to my book, Lives Per Gallon, wherein I laid out the actual costs that are on somebody's balance sheet, not just, say, lost productivity because of workers with asthma and things like that, but actual costs in tax credits and other kinds of externalities that the fossil fuel industry enjoys. And in my book, I calculated $7 a gallon on top of the pump price. So every time you fill up, you're actually paying $12 a gallon for gasoline when you could be paying $10 a kilogram instead, for the equivalent of $10 for hydrogen. So to the point is that, you know, if government really wants to make this happen, maybe one thing is to start charging the fossil fuel industry what it's really costing all of us, taking away some of those subsidies. And many people have talked about this. This isn't a new idea. And obviously that would have a lot of pushback. But if people could all hear Jack talk and understand what these health consequences are and the cost thereof, that might change it. But let me ask each of you, just in order to address that question of what are the barriers to seeing this kind of a hydrogen future in our transportation sector? Justin?
It's a great question. I think you know, part of it is education, to get people to understand what the technology is and what it offers. But as being part of the early market launch of fuel cell technology in the light-duty space, in 2015, there was a nice swell of station growth. There's a big interest. There's a big education campaign. We saw pretty significant growth. But since then, we've seen some challenges in the infrastructure space, both in equipment reliability and then, as Michael mentioned, the cost of the hydrogen. Those are kind of hurdles that we, as an industry, need to attack and address. That technology-wise, the fuel cell technology-wise, talk to anybody who drives a Mirai or a Hyundai fuel cell vehicle or a Honda fuel, they will tell you the vehicle is fantastic. It's a great vehicle.
They love the trucks too.
And they love the trucks too.
Yeah.
Right? And in the port equipment, people operating the port, they love the equipment. It really comes down to, can we solve the issues that have been on the infrastructure side? Yeah. I'm an engineer. It's just math. We can solve it. We just need to put the effort in to make that happen.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's really it. Education encompasses so many areas. People know what it's like to stick a plug into a wall and get electricity. So the whole technology industry has focused in these areas to some degree on battery electric technology. We have a lot of tenants ourselves that are focused on that because they're just not educated enough on what the opportunity can be to handle hydrogen, to dispatch hydrogen, and then you layer the fueling cost on top of that. It all becomes too much to manage in a very tight time frame to have to switch over your entire equipment fleet. And the same goes for on-road trucks, the reliability and the efficiency and the operations are obvious because all of the operators come back to us, whether it be cargo handling equipment or on-road trucks, and they praise these pieces of equipment because they work really well, they're reliable, the maintenance is limited as opposed to what they see on the battery electric side in this heavy-duty area. So that all works. It's education in regards to how are we going to get from where we're at today at $25 a kilogram to $10 or $8 a kilogram, where you're really within parity based on what Terry was talking about in regards to efficiency. If we can get there, then it's a lot easier to let people listen to how we're going to get that fuel into their pieces of equipment. Right now, they can't even hear us because it's so far apart that they can't go into their boardrooms and say, you know, the port is offering these subsidies to buy cargo handling equipment. Should we move forward with multi-million-dollar grants to do so? They can't get an ear for that, so they're focusing on a technology in the heavy-duty sector that is inferior to what we could provide them. But we need to get that price down to open the ear of education to allow that to happen, because right now we're stuck in that position.
Danny?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest gaps is the lack of education, like you said, actually. A lot of folks don't really understand the real cost, the cost of the cumulative impacts on our health. And if you would take that into account, you would see that, zero-emission vehicles are better for us, better for the environment. And I'd like to just reframe that as like, instead of asking why are they so expensive, or, how can we afford this, is like, how can we not? Because we cannot afford to not do anything about this anymore.
Thank you very much. I want to make two important points. First is that we need all of these technologies. We need the battery electric, we need fuel cell electric, we need these technologies for all applications, the light duty through the heavy duty in the transportation and freight corridors, and even in the port equipment. But let me just say that when it comes to the fundamentals associated with the price that you would pay for hydrogen, it's certain that it will eventually be cheaper than fossil. It is not a doubt. It's going to be way cheaper than fossil in the long run. The challenge that hydrogen has is one that's in addition to the other alternatives. We start out with zero infrastructure for hydrogen. No wires that are going to everyone's home, okay? No wires that are massive wires going to the ports or all the buildings. Okay, we start out with a zero infrastructure, except for like a minor piece of it in the refineries in the port there. Okay, so it's going to take a while for the infrastructure to catch up and be able to deliver hydrogen at a reasonable price. But fundamentally, you can look at the science of how learning rates and all this technology improvements happen over time. It's going to be cheaper than fossil. And when it does become cheaper than fossil, it's not only we that in California that are going to adopt it, the whole world will adopt it. And that's what's necessary to stop impacts on the climate.
Great, thank you. Michael?
A couple key points. One is, from a governance perspective, there's a lot of independent individual actors trying to come together to coordinate to solve this problem. And I think clarifying what government's role from local, because there's a lot of land use implications for local jurisdictions. You can't just put a hydrogen fueling station anywhere you want. You have to work with the local jurisdictions. You have to have a coordinated plan in terms of how do you create the pipelines to serve that. What are the ramifications of the installation of the different elements of just putting it in there. We have the same issue with where we put gas stations. Where would you put an electric charging facility? And the infrastructure, the lead time issue is massive. We've had a lot of concerns working with the utilities in terms of how much time it would take if we agreed today to fund a parcel to put in some kind of zero-emission technologies, whether it's electric or wires or pipelines. There's a massive amount of lead time, and that creates a lot of both frustration, a lot of uncertainty in terms of the ability to deliver. What's being funded? What is the role for us to play in terms of funding it? We have funding at Metro. The state has funding for various discretionary programs. There's more opportunities to maybe put together kind of that blueprint, that vision, because right now what we're seeing is there's different parcels being, being targeted for putting in zero emission technology, but that coordinated master plan, that understanding of all the local jurisdictions, the county, the different groups are kind of agreeing this is where the next 10 years is going to look like. So the ports are taken care of, the major trucking industries, the 710, like that needs to be articulated, and it kind of needs to cut through some of the confusion we have in terms of the governance side, because I think everyone wants to help and participate, but not everyone knows, what their role is or how they could be most effective or how they can get out of the way in some cases. The other thing I'll say is that from an incentive structure, what we've found is that the smaller operators have the most difficult time converting, and it's seen as a punishment, right? In terms of the amount of incentive, the tax implications, all the different things that are happening. Those are actually some of the more lower income, community members that are trying to operate trucks and participate versus larger fleets. So I think there needs to be kind of a common sense approach in terms of, the strategy, the amount of funding that's going into. If this really is a priority, then it's probably more of an incentive-based priority than a regulatory impact priority, because I think there's a lot of resistance to the burden of taking on the transition alone. And I think that's something we can help with if that's going to be a priority. And there's other funding partners that can work together. But that master plan, that vision, and that everyone's role, private, public, regulatory, et cetera, I think is going to need to be articulated the next couple of years.
Terrific. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on that. I think it's really important to align these two master plans, right? The de-escalation of the fossil fuel industry and the escalation of the hydrogen industry. Because although there is no infrastructure, there is a lot of infrastructure, actually. There is a lot of pipe in the ground that can be turned into hydrogen fuel distribution. There are facilities that are going to go out of use, and they are not going to be easily put into other uses because of the historic nature of the contamination on those sites and the uses on those sites. But they can be used for energy production, and they're already connected by pipeline. Typically, all of the refineries are connected by pipeline to a distribution hydrogen pipeline right now. Not to mention, there are a bunch of other fuel lines all over the region that can be turned into hydrogen transportation, and that's already been done. We've seen that in the city of Paramount at the former World Energy facility, where a hydrogen pipeline was pushed into that facility to provide hydrogen, and then was reversed to push hydrogen back into the ports. And so there's a lot of spaghetti in the ground, as we call it, at the ports, a lot of pipelines in the ground. You have a fossil fuel industry that is in the process of moving out of the state of California. There are a lot of assets there and a lot of land that can be used if properly engineered. And I think Michael made a really good point of creating that master plan, but very much aligning it with those land uses that will be conducive towards that today. And the rest of it, I think, will work itself out, because hydrogen is not going to be connected to everything by pipeline. It's going to work the same way that diesel and gasoline do today. There's going to be hubs. You're going to put a bunch of it there by pipeline. You're going to take it off of that hub, and you're going to disseminate it into the environment, into individual fueling stations, down into the ports as diesel is delivered today. So it can work around the same way from a master planning perspective. But we need to look at those big pieces of property that we have available now and all of the infrastructure that connects them, because that can all be reused.
Looks like Jack was going to jump in.
Yeah, 2 quick points. I totally agree with transforming the existing infrastructure, which we haven't started to do much. The Paramount thing's an awesome example of positive transformation. The second thing I wanted to mention is that for the smaller players that don't have the ability to make a big purchase or so, look to entities like First Public Hydrogen. I happen to be on the board, but that has an opportunity to aggregate a whole bunch of the small players and give them the same price as the big guys. Okay, I think that's a really nice opportunity for you to consider.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. No, I appreciate that, and definitely we'll be checking in on that, because, the coordinating the trucking industry is a lot different than the railroad industry or the port, so there's a lot of lack of trust as well. We've tried to reach out and engage, and it's like, why am I talking to you? I don't have time for this. So that kind of discussion, that education, that partnership, that's got to be looking at. I also throw in that the passenger rail system is a prime target for conversion to hydrogen. The Metrolink, Losan, there's opportunities there, and you're talking about driving down the price of hydrogen. I think the public piece of it, public transit agencies are trying to get to zero through state mandates. our railroads are trying to move in that direction, trying to figure out what technology works for them, performatively. So that public piece of it, I think, will be important because our concern on the electric side is the grid to support the entire system, the ports, the needs they have there, the bus systems. I mean, it's basically a lot of needs that are dependent on a grid that has issues. So that redundancy, the ability to have some kind of signal market support for the hydrogen piece is going to be important as well to kind of drive some of this.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I was told by someone at LADWP in the last 2 years that if you were to electrify all of the container handling equipment and then add the cold ironing where the ships can plug in and turn off their engines, that DWP would need about 10 years and $5 billion to upgrade the grid. They claim to have enough energy, but they just don't have the infrastructure. So when people say, oh yeah, all you got to do is plug your electric car into the existing grid, that's true for some people with a garage and the ability to do that at night. But the fast chargers would tell a different story, and they're not that fast. There's a lot of infrastructure that we're going to need. And again, I hate it when those of us that are trying to get to zero emission, circle the wagons and point the guns inward and start shooting.
Let's not do that.
We need all of it, to Jack's point earlier. But speaking of that and needing all of it, there's people that are just missing. You've all touched on that in your comments here, that are not at these tables. And we've got a great cross-section here of industry, of infrastructure and so forth here in academia and so on, all here today. But I want to ask you, who is missing? Who has not been at the table that is maybe slowing this down because they're not there? And Danny, I want to start with you, because environmental justice is one of the first things that gets talked about, and then probably the last thing that actually gets addressed in reality. Everybody wants to check that box and say they're part of an EJ working group or they've taken that into consideration. But my own experience, and I'll be the first to admit, when I was EPA secretary and created the Hydrogen Highway program to try to get all the parties together to work on this, I foolishly thought it was mostly about the fuel providers and the car manufacturers or the truck manufacturers. And Michael, to your point, I wasn't thinking about the fire marshals, about the insurance companies, about the neighborhoods, and what their concerns would be about having this new explosive gas in their neighborhood, et cetera. And to the point about environmental justice, we just assumed, oh, well, everyone will be happy with it because it'll be zero emission. So our environmental justice working group for AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, for our hydrogen highway, I would say has been a spectacular failure. And it's not that the people aren't at the table, it's that there's just a tendency, whether it's industry or regulators, to check the box and say, okay, we talked to them, and then they just go ahead and do whatever they're going to do. So, and again, I was part of that problem, so I can say it from a firsthand perspective. But Danny, let me hear from you first, and then I'd like to hear from our other panelists. Who is missing that maybe you've even tried to get to the table to work on this future, this zero-emission future, whether it's hydrogen, battery, other things, and who should be here?
Thanks for that question. The answer is very simple. It's actually common sense. It's the people that live in the frontline communities like myself. It's the ones that are most affected by our policies and by our governments and by pollution. So, we want to create solutions, right? We want to build our careers on solving these problems, but if we don't include all of those that are personally affected by, all the goods movement, then what exactly are we doing? And, how is that helping those folks, right? And also, another thing, as I look around the room, there's very few people that are younger than 24 in this room. And, maybe one of your students. There needs to be authentic community outreach to youth. There's a lot of power and a lot of knowledge that we can tap into. There's a lot of multi-generational folks that are not a part of these conversations. And they carry with them the historical knowledge of our communities. So, first, authentic community outreach, which is something that our nonprofit specializes in. We worked on the Metro Blue Line First Last Mile Plan, an award-winning plan, because we started with community outreach. That plan was the first in Metro's history to choose nonprofits to do the outreach. And then we chose a planning firm to do the technological work. And what we found is that when nonprofits work together with Metro, with cities, in public planning, the results are much better.
Anyone else want to address who else is missing from this discussion?
Well, I just want to, my comments were going to echo that in our discussion, obviously working with the 710 communities, they have been dealing with this for generations. You're talking about, I think we need more of that localized approach. If you're talking about a corridor where you want to put infrastructure, you need to convene the corridor. From Metro's perspective, we've shifted, it's not just the elected official city mechanism, which is the land use mechanism and some of the authority, but also making sure that the communities, both CBOs, but also directly to communities, that requires time and effort, translation. We went through a whole really rich process. We won an award for it, but we're just grateful that it happened and that we learned a lot from it, because I think you need that buy-in, because even if you have the projects in place, the master plan, everything like that, if the environmental process to move it forward, if you hit that challenge because you didn't do the work up front, you're going to lose a lot of time and you'll put a lot more money into it, and it's just not going to be delivering the benefits that you want to have. So I think that is one aspect, and I think, I don't know if it's some form of not a JPA, but some form of a contract where subregions can basically identify where they want things and what are the benefits as well, right? In terms of, workforce development, who's going to be operating these areas? How do we connect local communities to the benefits provided through investment, not just avoiding impacts? I think that's kind of that holistic 360 approach that we were looking at Metro, and appreciate the comments on the new blue, because that's been kind of an ongoing template. So I'll start with that. Just wanted to put that there.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. So as Danny mentioned, community engagement is going to be kind of the key part of it moving forward. But also, Bill's heard me say this a million times, though, we also have to keep thinking about how do we educate the local authorities that are approving these projects that have to come in. So when I first started with hydrogen, the fastest we could ever go in the early 2000s was 6 months from concept to build. That was great. That set world records. That's light speed for construction projects. But there were some cities where the exact same project with the exact same parts and the exact same equipment would be 24 or 36 months. Today, that's still a problem. 25 years later, I still can't fast track a hydrogen station. Why is that? Why do we have to keep educating everyone over and over again like it's a new thing?
Well, one answer to that might be, my contribution to this would be to say we're missing a PR firm. And, my former boss, Governor Schwarzenegger, always said it doesn't matter how good your movie is, no one's going to see it if you don't promote it. And I think part of the problem, whether it's any of these stakeholders that we're all talking about, is the misperception about hydrogen. Oh, it's the Hindenburg, it's going to blow up. Oh, it's different. When you hear about electric vehicles or EVs, everyone says battery. Well, a hydrogen fuel cell is an EV. It's just powered by something different. So I think the education piece in general that we've all talked about, but very specifically getting reporters to come to some of these kinds of events. Is there anybody here from the media today? No. And I'm sure there is covering, maybe other sessions are covering Verdexchange in general, but getting this information into the public's awareness. I mean, everybody's heard of Tesla and has heard of being able to plug in your car. But I guarantee you 99% of the people out on the street, if you ask them about hydrogen, they won't have a clue. And that includes then city officials and others that are trying to permit things if it's still a mystery. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left and we've got some questions, so let's start right here in the front row.
Yeah, I actually have a common question for Justin on efficiency and Jack on emissions. So we work heavily in heavy duty and fuel cell. There's a big push in the industrial sector with truck OEMs to go to hydrogen internal combustion engine. So could you respond to, is that indeed a transition technology of value, or does that take the eye off the prize to true zero with fuel cells? So Justin, you can speak to efficiency related to those, and Jack, you can speak to the emissions.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think, so we actually at Toyota have a hydrogen combustion race car that we've been demonstrating in other areas. And what we've been able to show with that is that there could be an application for hydrogen ICEs when the engine is kind of restricted in physical dimension and it has to operate at peak power. In that kind of condition, if you're going to hit that 35, 40%, that's okay. That's really good for a combustion engine at that point. But in a fuel cell space, you can get a much, much higher efficiency. And sometimes when you'll hear people say, well, ICE at high power is more efficient than a fuel cell at high power, that's true. That's called physics. So that just means you didn't optimize your fuel cell correctly for that application, is what it means.
Yes, and I think that we should support hydrogen combustion engines as well as hydrogen fuel cell engines for our immediate deployment. In the end, I think the hydrogen fuel cell application is going to win out and going to be the preferred technology, both from a performance perspective, but especially because of completely zero NOx emissions. Okay, completely zero NOx emissions. You can't get that with an IC engine. On the other hand, immediate application of hydrogen to ICE combustion engines does reduce both NOx and particulate matter compared to diesel fossil. Okay, so why wouldn't we want that right away if we can get it? Okay, so you can't eliminate the NOx. Okay, nitrogen oxides come from the fact that we use air in engines. Okay, if you're gonna use air, you have both nitrogen and oxygen present. If you burn the fuel, it gets hot enough to make the nitrogen oxides, which do this. Okay, and that's one of the biggest emissions for health impacts and also for air quality in general.
I would just add to that that probably the biggest barrier to your question is cost of the fuel if we're going to use greener hydrogen. If we're using fossil fuel-based hydrogen, then it makes total sense, and I know Cummins and others are trying to develop that and get permission from CARB to use those in California. But if we're talking about $25 a kilogram hydrogen, then you're going to want the most efficient application, I would think. Other questions? We've got time for a couple of more. Yes, over here.
Hi, I'm a senior at Port of Los Angeles High School, so I'm really local to the port and the refinery as well. So emissions is. And you're under 24. Yes.
Yes.
I'm 17. I know that the creation of hydrogen fuel requires significant energy inputs, and if the energy for the fuel creation comes from fossil fuels, how can it be ensured that the emissions saved from the implementation of widespread hydrogen fuel transportation use isn't counteracted or even overshadowed by the emissions from the fuel production?
I'll make a couple of points there. Thank you for the question. Thank you for being here. There are two separate kinds of emissions that we should be concerned with. One of them is climate forcing emissions. Those include carbon dioxide, that's the biggest one associated with energy conversion, but also methane, that's the second largest one responsible for climate change. Okay? Those two come from current fossil fuel use. Okay. If we let any of the methane leak out, it has a severe impact. It's worse than CO2, okay? So it's better to actually burn methane than to let it leak out into the atmosphere from a climate perspective. If you make hydrogen, even from fossil methane, there are immediate benefits in the end use. You just pointed that out, right? Because you don't have nitrogen oxides and you don't have carbon emissions in the end use. But what happens upstream? If you have methane leakage and hydrogen leakage, it can be even worse than the original. This is your point, right, in the question. So what do we need to do? We need to eventually, especially focus on eliminating the methane emissions up front, because hydrogen itself doesn't have a radiative forcing impact. It doesn't have a greenhouse gas impact. It's only because it leaves methane in the atmosphere longer and has water production that could get in the stratosphere and things like this, indirect impacts. Okay, so that's all climate stuff that I've been talking about. When it comes to criteria pollutants, it's all better. Okay, so make sure you think about the stuff that impacts your health, the stuff that makes the air brown, the stuff that impacts like acid rain and these kinds of things. Those are all better even if we make hydrogen from fossil. The climate side, you have some challenges, like you pointed out.
Great question. Yeah. We've got 1 minute left, so one more quick question from the audience, and then I'm going to challenge a very quick round for the panel. Go ahead, sir.
In your Hightower Metropolitan Water District, you have water, you can make hydrogen. But if you have a fleet, what's kind of the minimum requirements you need to do a pilot? You can't just go full bore converting all of your vehicles. what's a good, actually, what's the smallest size? And I did the embryo. I saw the 1 megawatts.
Great.
That was awesome.
Mike, you've got some demonstration projects in the port.
We have demonstration projects for cargo handling equipment that are one piece of equipment. And so it can be that small. We have demonstration projects for on-road trucks that were 10 pieces of equipment. So it doesn't have to be very, very large. I think there's some range in between there that you could probably utilize and get.
That's presuming hydrogen delivery. So you're getting hydrogen delivered to your facility if you do this one-piece conversion?
Well, one-piece conversion does include hydrogen delivery, yeah. That is a complex situation because of everything else we've talked about here. It's the market positioning of needing 100 kilograms of hydrogen a day and getting someone to listen to you. That's a reality of the marketplace that does become an issue. So the more you have, obviously, the easier it is to allow for that to happen. But it also depends on where you are. So if you're somewhere within the food chain where there are a variety of other people, and this is where Jason, I don't know where he went, is going to help from Lancaster, is to aggregate that demand so that person that's distributing is dropping off to a variety of different users that have all aggregated their demand to push the market down for that delivery and to push the cost of delivery down. So I think that's critical, and that's something that's existent, but nobody sees it in the fossil fuel industry, but it's going on every day. Yeah. In the hydrogen industry, that's something that will come about and will create that efficiency of cost. And I think it will come about soon because as you have these smaller pilot projects popping up, especially in a dense region like LA, especially down by the ports, there are a variety of users that are really close to each other, and we'll take advantage of that.
Good points. Thank you. So I know we're out of time, so I'm going to just ask a lightning round here for each one of you to answer this question I started out with, which we were supposed to be talking about the 710 corridor. We've talked about all kinds of goods movement and hydrogen, which is great. But I coined this term, the hydrogen highway. The 710 could be our first actual hydrogen highway if we do this right. So what is your prediction? Give me a year by which time you think that at least heavy-duty goods movement in the Southern California region, including the 710, could be zero emission of all types.
It's a very challenging question. I don't know if I can answer it in a lightning round. So I think speaking to Michael's point, we've been demonstrating it. We've had our 10 trucks in operation running our stuff from the port to our plant in Ontario. We're going to see that happen very quickly, probably over the next handful of years.
Mike?
2035 by mandate at the ports.
All right. I like it. Danny?
Not soon enough.
Fair enough.
I agree, 2035.
As a cynical pragmatist, sometimes 2040, I'll say, but I just know that it's going to be a lot of coordination and heavy lifting. And at the point, there's a spark of leadership to make sure that everyone that has a role is at the table and weighing in, then they'll fast track from there.
Fantastic. Well, I'll leave you with a quote from Shakespeare who said, "Nature's bequest gives nothing but doth lend. And so when nature calls thee to be gone, what acceptable legacy canst thou leave?" I think what the fact all of you are doing by being here today and all of our panelists working on this topic, it's a legacy that even William Shakespeare would write plays and poems about if he were alive today. Thank our panel, please.